Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here. Now, this is a video I've wanted to do forever. Batman v Superman was a tug of war. You've got Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio and David Goyer wanting to make their vision of this film and continue from Man of Steel. You've got Warner Brothers who want a popcorn-chomping blockbuster to compete with the MCU. But then in the middle, you've got Christopher Nolan protecting the vision of his friend David Goyer, Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder. So Warner Brothers, the studio who are funding this movie, are between a rock and a hard place. So they think, okay, we can't change the trajectory this film's going in, but maybe if we market it as a blockbuster, we may get away with this. So they come up with this hashtag, who will win. Every trailer makes it look like an epic blockbuster. They make it about the fight between Batman and Superman, but that's not what this film is. Now, if only they promoted it honestly, everyone would have known that this was a unique take on Batman and Superman's story. It's comparable to Logan, right? Logan was marketed by Fox the way it was. It wasn't a popcorn-chomping blockbuster. It was a gritty, indie type of movie, and people were excited. And if BVS was promoted in the same way, we wouldn't have had the same problem with critics and the mainstream audience. But you've got the studio tugging in one direction, and you've got the creatives tugging in another. Then they try and cut the film down to put across the kind of movie that they wanted. Then, because they don't make the couple of billion they thought they would make, then they think, oh, sod it, we might as well just let Zack Snyder put together the kind of film that he wanted to do, and let's have an extended cut. So the extended cut, to a lot of people, is the ultimate vision of this film, and it really is a fantastic cut. I like the theatrical version. I ain't got a problem with it. But then, even though Warner Brothers and Zack Snyder are pulling in two different directions, they make the vital error. They allow him to continue with Justice League. This is where, before they went into Justice League, they should have went their separate ways. Because if it's like when you're in a relationship, right, with a woman or a man or whoever, right, and you're pulling in two different directions, it's not going to work. Yeah, you can be individual, you can be yourselves and do your own thing. But if you don't want the same things, ultimately, the relationship isn't going to work. And the relationship between Zack Snyder and Warner Brothers never worked because both parties wanted two different things. But if only they marketed BVS in the correct way, in the honest way, I don't believe this film would have got the hate that it did, because the audience, the consumer, thought they were getting something totally different because Warner Brothers misrepresented what BVS was. And this was the entire problem. But this was a mistake from the beginning. They brought in Christopher Nolan in this Godfather role because he did so well with the Dark Knight trilogy. But I don't think Christopher Nolan particularly understands Superman. But I mean, it was a great version, don't get me wrong. But because Warner Brothers wanted blockbusters, popcorn-chomping movies, and this is why it was wrong from the beginning. And you get this criticism of the franchise being too dark. And this is the problem. They put the wrong man in charge in Christopher Nolan. Not because there's anything wrong with Christopher Nolan or him bringing in Zack Snyder. It's because they didn't want to go the way that Chris wanted to go, the way Zack wanted to go, the way David Goyer wanted to go. So ultimately, for me, Batman v Superman isn't a bad film. It was just badly marketed, and both parties wanted two different things. So the relationship couldn't work. So again, what happens in the middle of Justice League after Zack completes his cut? They don't like it. They send him back. No, we want it lighter. He tries, but Zack being Zack isn't going to make this a light Justice League like we got. He wants some elements of darkness and kind of injustice, if you like, kind of like the game. He wanted to do it like that. I still think Snyder's cut would have made about 900 million. It wouldn't have made the billions that everyone expected it to be, but it would have been a great film. definitely. But again, this is the problem that Warner Brothers made. Mistake, getting Nolan involved. Mistake with Batman v Superman and the marketing. And then after all that hassle and all those troubles, they make the same mistake again with Justice League. And this was the problem. Now they've in Walter Hamada, they've got the man in they want. He's going to take it to where they want it to go. Everyone is pulling in the right direction, as we can see from the reaction to Aquaman. You've got James Wan directing the film. You've got Walter Hamada and James Wan together, who have worked together before, who are pulling in the same direction. And this is where it all went wrong. And really, it's amazing when I think about some of these projects, how messed up they get. When you've got experienced people who are trained to make films, to fund films, to market films. And they took Batman v Superman and they marketed it in an irresponsible... They lied to us. They told us it's going to be a blockbuster. It's going to be like the MCU, basically. But it wasn't that. But if they just told us, look, guys, this is going to be a unique, gritty, indie type of movie, which, this looks interesting, as we thought with Logan. Wow, this looks amazing. This doesn't look like a typical CBM, does it? This looks a bit unique. And the way Logan was received, Batman v Superman would have been received as well. There wouldn't have been the hate for it. But if you tell someone you're giving them a PS4 and they open up and they've got socks for Christmas, what's going to happen? Major disappointment. And ultimately, there's going to be an eruption. And that is the tug of war which happened with Batman v Superman. It's a big tragedy because this truly is a fantastic film. It's fantastic storytelling. But because people thought they were going to get something else, and of course there was mixed response to Man of Steel, but Man of Steel is a lot more of a blockbuster for the mainstream consumer than Batman v Superman is. So even though people had issues with Man of Steel, again, I love Man of Steel, one of my favourite CBMs, but at least that was closer to what Warner Brothers wanted. But when you get to Batman v Superman and nobody can agree with the vision, with the creative element, you get an absolute tug of war, you get a mess, and you get a film, which for me is really good, but you give the media, the critics, the opportunity to chomp away at it, to say, nah, this is... But the real reason is they weren't given the film they thought they were going to get. But this is what happens. And the mistake from the beginning was getting Nolan involved, because Nolan, we saw with his Dark Knight trilogy, the kind of thing he likes. They brought Nolan in because they thought, yeah, people love him, people trust him. I think they wanted Nolan to write and direct Man of Steel and BVS on his own, and he wasn't having it. He wanted to bring someone else in because he didn't believe he could do Superman justice. So what happens in, he brings Zack Snyder in. The problem is with bringing Zack Snyder in, and I love Zack, he's a controversial figure in film. A lot of people, unfortunately, just don't like the way he makes films, and that's a shame. So already you've got a bit of a problem. But it's always good to look back after the fact, and I mean, it's always good to be... I mean, it's all very well being wise after the event, but from the outside looking in, the film was marketed wrong. Nobody could agree what type of film this could be, and then you've got an almighty mess, and the media were having a field day, and us fans, a DC fan like me, just thinking, oh, for crying out loud, this is just not fair. There's so much negativity. I mean, the bullshit that was spoken about that Martha moment, people doing memes about it and things like that. And that's a shame. And then you get to Justice League, they throw him off, right? And then they've got to bring someone else in. Henry's got a beard and a tash. They've got to work on his upper lip. And it's an absolute disaster. And and the mistake was really from the beginning, getting the wrong guy that didn't want to do what Warner Brothers wanted them to do. And that, my friends, is what happened with Batman v Superman. And that's why it was a tug of war.